The morning sun cast long shadows across Kensington Palace as Prince William walked through the familiar corridors he had known since childhood. His footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floors, each step carrying the weight of recent conversations that had been troubling his mind for weeks. Kate was still sleeping peacefully in their private quarters, unaware of the storm that was about to change their lives forever. William paused outside his private study, his hand resting on the ornate brass handle. Behind this door lay a stack of confidential documents that had arrived the previous evening through secure diplomatic channels. The official seal of the British Intelligence Service was still intact on the manila envelope, but William already knew what it contained. The preliminary briefing he had received from his private secretary had been enough to make his blood run cold. For months, there had been whispers in the corridors of power about a security breach that went deeper than anyone had initially realized. What had started as a routine investigation into press leaks had uncovered something far more sinister. Someone with high-level access to the royal family's private information had been systematically selling intimate details to foreign tabloids and potentially hostile intelligence agencies. William pushed open the door and stepped into his study, where the morning light streamed through tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. The room was exactly as he had left it the night before, except for the presence of Sir Marcus Whitworth, the head of royal security, who stood beside the mahogany desk with a grave expression etched across his weathered face. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Marcus said with a respectful nod, though his usual composed demeanor betrayed signs of deep concern. "I'm afraid the situation is far worse than we initially suspected. The investigation has revealed a network of individuals who have had unprecedented access to your family's most private moments." William moved to his desk and carefully broke the official seal on the envelope. As he began to read the detailed report, his face grew progressively paler. The document contained a comprehensive list of every private conversation, family gathering, and intimate moment that had been recorded, photographed, or documented without their knowledge over the past 3 years. The betrayal ran deep through their inner circle. Staff members they had trusted with their children, advisors who had shared family dinners, and even individuals who had been present during Kate's most vulnerable moments after childbirth, had been systematically documenting and selling their private lives. The report detailed how hidden cameras had been placed in their private residence, how their personal phones had been monitored, and how their children's daily routines had been mapped and sold to the highest bidders. What made the situation even more devastating was the discovery that some of this information had been used to orchestrate several seemingly random encounters with paparazzi and journalists over the years. Moments that the family had believed were unfortunate coincidences were actually carefully planned ambushes, timed to capture them at their most vulnerable. Sir Marcus pointed to a particular section of the report that highlighted the international implications of the security breach. "We have evidence that this information has been shared with intelligence agencies from at least 3 foreign countries. They have detailed profiles of your family's psychological vulnerabilities, your children's temperaments, and even Kate's health concerns that she has never made public." William's hands trembled slightly as he read about the intimate details that had been recorded and shared. Private conversations between him and Kate about their fears as parents. Discussions about George, Charlotte, and Louis's personalities and developmental concerns, and even Kate's struggles with the pressures of royal life had all been documented and analyzed by strangers, with unknown motives. The report revealed that the breach had been orchestrated by someone who had gained their complete trust and had access to their most private spaces. This person had been systematically documenting their lives for years, building detailed dossiers that painted a complete picture of the royal family's private world. The level of intimate detail was staggering and deeply violating. As William continued reading, he discovered that several recent public incidents that had caused Kate significant distress were not random events, but had been deliberately orchestrated using the stolen private information. Photographers had been positioned at specific locations based on advanced knowledge of the family's private plans, and certain media stories had been crafted using intimate details that should never have been public knowledge. The psychological profile of Kate that had been compiled was particularly disturbing. It detailed her insecurities, her coping mechanisms during difficult times, and even analyzed her body language during private family moments to predict her likely reactions to various stressful situations. This information had apparently been used to time certain media attacks when she would be most psychologically vulnerable. Sir Marcus explained that the investigation had required cooperation with international intelligence agencies and had taken months to unravel completely. The sophistication of the operation suggested that it was not merely tabloid journalism, but potentially something more sinister, with possible connections to organized crime or foreign intelligence operations. William realized that he was now faced with an impossible decision. The report contained enough evidence to prosecute several individuals and potentially expose the full extent of the violation their family had experienced. However, doing so would mean making public many of the intimate details that had been stolen, essentially giving the perpetrators what they had wanted all along: complete exposure of the royal family's private life. The alternative was to handle the matter privately, which would mean that the public would never know the true extent of what had happened, but it would also mean that justice might not be fully served. Either path would have profound consequences for Kate and their children, who had been innocent victims of this systematic violation of their privacy and security. As William closed the report, he knew that the next few hours would be among the most difficult of his life. He would have to tell Kate everything, knowing that the revelation would shatter her sense of security and trust in ways that might never fully heal. The woman who had given up her private life to serve the crown had discovered that even her most intimate moments had been stolen and commodified by those she had trusted most. William spent the next hour pacing his study, rehearsing in his mind how he would break this devastating news to Kate. Sir Marcus had left him alone with the report, understanding that the prince needed time to process the full magnitude of what they had discovered. The morning sun had climbed higher, and William knew that Kate would soon wake up and begin her daily routine, completely unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. The hardest part was knowing that Kate had always been the most trusting member of their inner circle. She had welcomed staff members into their home with genuine warmth, often treating them like extended family. She remembered their birthdays, asked about their children, and had even attended some of their personal celebrations. The idea that some of these same people had been systematically betraying that trust would devastate her in ways that William could barely comprehend. He thought about all the times over the past few years when Kate had expressed concerns about feeling watched or uncomfortable in certain situations. There had been moments when she had mentioned feeling like someone was listening to their private conversations, or when she had inexplicably felt uneasy about certain staff members. William had always reassured her that she was being overly cautious, attributing her concerns to the natural paranoia that came with their public position. Now he realized that her instincts had been absolutely correct. The report contained detailed transcripts of conversations that only the two of them should have known about, private discussions they had shared while walking in their garden, intimate moments they had believed were completely secure, and even conversations they had conducted in what they thought were the most private areas of their residence. The violation was so complete and systematic that it made William question every interaction they had experienced over the past 3 years. As he prepared to face Kate, William's phone buzzed with a secure message from his private secretary. The message was brief but ominous. Additional information has come to light. Request immediate meeting before you speak with the Duchess. The timing could not have been worse, but William knew that whatever additional information had been discovered could be crucial to understanding the full scope of the situation. Within 20 minutes, his private secretary arrived with another sealed envelope, this one marked with even higher security classifications. The additional information was somehow even more disturbing than the original report. The investigation had uncovered evidence that the surveillance and information gathering had been going on for much longer than initially believed, possibly dating back to the early days of William and Kate's marriage. More troubling still, the new evidence suggested that some of the private information had been used to influence media coverage and public opinion about Kate in subtle but significant ways. Stories that had been published about her parenting style, her relationships with other royal family members, and even speculation about her mental health had been crafted using stolen intimate knowledge about her private struggles and insecurities. The psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and deliberate. Media stories had been timed to coincide with periods when Kate was dealing with personal challenges, amplifying her stress and making it more difficult for her to cope with public scrutiny. The perpetrators had essentially weaponized her own private emotions against her, using intimate knowledge of her vulnerabilities to maximize the psychological impact of negative coverage. William realized that several incidents over the past few years that had caused Kate significant distress were not random coincidences but calculated attacks designed to destabilize her emotional well-being. Times when she had struggled with public appearances, moments when she had seemed particularly vulnerable to criticism, and even some of her health issues had potentially been exacerbated by this systematic psychological manipulation. The new report also revealed that their children had not been spared from this surveillance. Private information about George, Charlotte, and Louis's personalities, their academic performance, their friendships, and even their private conversations with their parents had been documented and analyzed. This information had been used to craft media speculation about the children's futures and their relationships with their parents that was based on stolen intimate knowledge. What made this revelation even more heartbreaking was the discovery that some of the surveillance had occurred during family celebrations and private milestones that should have been sacred. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, quiet family dinners, and even bedtime routines had been monitored and documented. The perpetrators had stolen not just information, but precious family memories that could never be reclaimed. William's hands shook as he read about how Kate's private struggles with the pressures of royal life had been systematically documented and analyzed. Her moments of doubt, her fears about raising their children in the public eye, and her concerns about living up to public expectations had all been recorded and potentially shared with hostile parties who could use this information against her in the future. The report detailed how this private information had been cross-referenced with public schedules and media coverage to create predictive models of Kate's likely emotional responses to various situations. This had enabled the perpetrators to time their releases of damaging information and coordinate media attacks when Kate would be least able to cope with the additional stress. As William prepared to finally face Kate with this devastating news, he realized that the conversation would not just be about revealing what had happened, but about rebuilding their entire sense of security and trust. Every staff member, every advisor, and every person who had access to their private lives would now be suspect until they could be thoroughly investigated and cleared. The investigation had also revealed that the security breach had international implications that could affect their roles as representatives of the British Crown. Foreign intelligence agencies had detailed psychological profiles of the royal family that could be used to influence diplomatic negotiations or to predict their responses to international crises. William knew that when he opened the door to their bedroom to wake Kate, he would not just be sharing devastating news about their privacy being violated. He would be telling the woman he loved that their entire life together had been lived under the scrutiny of unknown enemies who had systematically stolen their most intimate moments and used them as weapons against their family. The morning that had begun with sunshine and the promise of a normal day was about to become the day that changed everything. William took a deep breath, steeled himself for what was to come, and prepared to face the most difficult conversation of their marriage. William stood outside their bedroom door for several minutes, his hand hovering over the handle as he struggled to find the courage to enter. Through the door, he could hear Kate moving around, probably getting ready for what she believed would be another routine day of royal engagements and family time. The sound of her humming softly while she prepared for the day made his heart ache, knowing that he was about to shatter her sense of security forever. When he finally opened the door, Kate was standing by their dresser, brushing her hair in preparation for the day ahead. She looked up at him with a warm smile that immediately faltered when she saw his expression. After more than a decade together, she could read his moods better than anyone, and she instantly recognized that something was seriously wrong. "William, what is it?" she asked, setting down her brush and turning to face him completely. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Has something happened to the children?" Her immediate concern for their children made what William had to tell her even more painful. He knew that in many ways, what had happened to their family was worse than a physical threat, because it had violated the psychological safety that Kate needed to function as both a mother and a public figure. "The children are fine," William said quietly. closing the door behind him and moving to sit on the edge of their bed. "But Kate, I need you to sit down. What I have to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear." Kate's face went pale and she immediately moved to sit beside him, her hands instinctively reaching for his. "You're scaring me, William. Just tell me what's happened." William took her hands in his and looked directly into her eyes, knowing that this moment would forever change how she viewed their life together. "We've discovered that for the past several years, someone very close to us has been systematically invading our privacy. They've been recording our private conversations, documenting our family life, and selling this information to tabloids and potentially to foreign intelligence agencies." Kate stared at him in stunned silence for several long moments, her mind struggling to process what he was telling her. "What do you mean recording our conversations? Who would do such a thing?" William explained everything he had learned from the security reports, watching as Kate's expression changed from disbelief to horror, to a deep, crushing sadness. He told her about the hidden surveillance equipment that had been discovered throughout their private residence, about the staff members who had betrayed their trust, and about the international implications of the security breach. As the full scope of the violation became clear, Kate began to tremble. "Are you telling me that when I was struggling after Louis was born, when I was having those private conversations with you about feeling overwhelmed and inadequate, someone was listening? Someone was recording those moments when I was at my most vulnerable?" William nodded, his own eyes filling with tears as he watched the woman he loved grapple with the magnitude of what had been done to their family. "Yes, and they used that information to time negative media coverage when they knew you would be least able to handle it. Some of the worst periods of press criticism you've experienced were deliberately orchestrated, using intimate knowledge of your private struggles." Kate stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold herself together. "All those times I told you I felt like someone was watching us, like someone was listening to our conversations. You told me I was being paranoid." The accusation in her voice was gentle but devastating. William realized that not only had Kate's privacy been violated, but her concerns had been dismissed by the one person who should have believed her instinctively. "I'm so sorry, Kate. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted your instincts." Kate turned back to face him, tears streaming down her face. "What about the children? Please tell me they haven't been watching our children." This was the question William had been dreading most. He had to tell her that their children's private lives had also been systematically documented and analyzed. Their bedtime conversations, their innocent childhood observations, their relationships with their parents, all of it had been recorded and potentially shared with strangers who had no right to that intimate knowledge. "I'm afraid they have been monitoring the children as well," William said quietly. "Every aspect of their daily lives, their personalities, their development, it's all been documented." Kate's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into a chair by the window, her hands covering her face as she began to sob. The realization that her children's innocence had been violated in such a fundamental way was more than she could bear. As a mother, her primary instinct was to protect her children, and discovering that she had unknowingly failed to keep them safe from such an insidious threat was devastating. "How could we not have known?" she asked through her tears. "How could people we trusted, people we welcomed into our home, people who watched our children grow up, how could they do this to us?" William moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his again. "Because we trusted them completely. We never imagined that anyone could be capable of such a systematic betrayal. They used our trust and our genuine care for the people who work with us against us." Kate looked up at him with eyes full of pain and confusion. "What does this mean for us? For our family? How can we ever feel safe again? How can we trust anyone?" These were the questions that William had been asking himself since learning about the security breach. The practical implications were staggering. Every staff member would need to be investigated, every security protocol would need to be revised, and every aspect of their private life would need to be examined to determine what else might have been compromised. But the psychological implications were even more profound. Kate had always been someone who needed to feel emotionally safe in order to function effectively in her public role. The knowledge that their most intimate moments had been violated would likely affect her ability to relax and be herself, even in their most private spaces. "We're going to have to rebuild everything," William said honestly. Our security, our staff, our entire sense of what privacy means to our family. It's going to take time and it's going to be difficult, but we'll get through this together. Kate wiped her tears and looked at him, with a mixture of love and determination that he recognized from their wedding day and from the births of their children, moments when she had to summon strength she didn't know she possessed. What do we do now? How do we protect our children from this? How do we even begin to fix something this comprehensive? William knew that the next steps would be crucial, not just for their security but for their ability to heal as a family from this profound violation. The decisions they made in the coming hours and days would determine whether they could rebuild their sense of safety and trust, or whether this betrayal would permanently change the way they related to the world around them. The rest of that morning passed in a blur of difficult decisions and painful revelations. William and Kate sat together in their private sitting room as Sir Marcus and several other security officials briefed them on the full extent of the investigation. Each new piece of information seemed to cut deeper than the last, revealing layers of betrayal that neither of them had imagined possible. The most shocking revelation came when they learned the identity of the primary person responsible for orchestrating the surveillance network. It was someone they had both trusted implicitly, someone who had been present for intimate family moments, and who had even helped care for their children during their most vulnerable early years. The betrayal was so personal and so complete that Kate had to excuse herself from the room several times to compose herself. "I held this person's baby," Kate said quietly when she returned from one of these breaks. "I attended their wedding. I trusted them with my children when they were infants." "How is it possible that someone could maintain such a deception for so long?" Sir Marcus explained that the level of sophistication suggested that the primary perpetrator had likely been recruited and trained by professionals, possibly even before they had begun working for the royal household. The surveillance operation had been planned and executed with a level of precision that indicated it was not merely opportunistic, but part of a larger, coordinated effort. The security briefing revealed that the stolen information had been used in ways that went far beyond simple tabloid journalism. Some of the private details about Kate's emotional states and psychological vulnerabilities had been shared with organizations that specialized in psychological manipulation and public opinion research. This explained why certain media campaigns against her had been so precisely targeted and devastatingly effective. Kate learned that several of her most difficult public moments over the past few years had been deliberately engineered using intimate knowledge of her private struggles. Media stories that had criticized her parenting, questioned her mental health, or suggested problems in her marriage had been carefully crafted using stolen information about her actual private concerns and insecurities. "They turned my own thoughts against me," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They knew exactly what I was worried about privately, and they used those fears to create public narratives that made me doubt myself even more. The psychological warfare had been sophisticated and relentless. The perpetrators had identified Kate's core insecurities about her role as a mother and as a member of the royal family, then systematically exploited those vulnerabilities through carefully timed media attacks that amplified her private fears and made them public concerns." William watched as Kate processed each new revelation, seeing how the comprehensive nature of the betrayal was affecting her ability to trust not just others, but her own judgment. She began questioning every interaction they had experienced, every staff member they had trusted, and every moment when she had felt safe and secure in their private life. The investigation had also uncovered evidence that some of the surveillance had been used to influence their children's experiences in subtle but significant ways. Information about the children's personalities, their friendships, and their private conversations had been used to orchestrate supposedly chance encounters with photographers and to plant stories about their development that were based on stolen intimate knowledge. "They stole our children's innocence," Kate said, her anger finally beginning to surface through her grief. "They turned our private family moments into commodities to be sold and analyzed. How do we even begin to explain this to George, Charlotte, and Louis?" This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire situation. The children would need to be told something about what had happened, but explaining the full scope of the betrayal in age-appropriate terms seemed almost impossible. They would need to understand why certain staff members would no longer be part of their lives, why new security measures were being implemented, and why their parents were struggling emotionally. The security team explained that the immediate priority was implementing new protocols to ensure that such a comprehensive breach could never happen again. This would involve extensive background investigations of all current staff, the installation of counter-surveillance equipment throughout their private residences, and the development of new procedures for handling sensitive family information. Kate listened to these practical measures with growing anxiety. Are you telling me that our home, the place where we should feel most safe and private, is going to become even more like a fortress? How can we raise our children normally when we have to assume that everyone around us might be documenting our private lives? The question highlighted one of the most profound long-term consequences of the security breach. The violation had been so complete that it would be impossible for William and Kate to simply return to their previous way of living. Every aspect of their private life would now need to be approached with caution and suspicion. Sir Marcus assured them that the goal was to restore their sense of privacy and security, not to make their home feel like a prison. However, the practical reality was that certain changes would be permanent. Staff access to private areas would be severely restricted. Electronic devices would be subject to regular security sweeps, and certain types of intimate family activities would need to be conducted in specially secured areas. As the briefing concluded, William and Kate were left alone to process the full magnitude of what they had learned. The morning that had begun with the promise of normalcy had revealed that their entire life together had been lived under the scrutiny of people who had systematically violated their most intimate moments. Kate stood by the window looking out at the palace gardens where she had spent countless peaceful hours with their children, now knowing that even those seemingly private moments had likely been observed and documented. I don't know how to feel safe anymore, she admitted to William. If we couldn't detect something this comprehensive happening right under our noses, how can we trust that it won't happen again? William joined her at the window, putting his arm around her shoulders as they both contemplated a future that would necessarily be different from the past they had believed was private. We start by accepting that our old way of living is gone, he said quietly. Then we build something new that protects our family while still allowing us to be genuine with each other and with our children. The conversation that continued throughout that difficult day would become the foundation for how they rebuilt their life together. They would need to find ways to maintain intimacy and authenticity while accepting that their sense of safety had been forever changed. The betrayal had been so profound that healing would require not just new security measures, but a fundamental reimagining of how they related to the world around them. As evening approached, they knew they would soon need to face their children and begin the difficult process of explaining why their world was about to change in ways that a young child could barely comprehend. The evening that followed was one of the most emotionally challenging of William and Kate's marriage. They had to find a way to tell their children that some of the people they had trusted and loved would no longer be part of their lives, without explaining the devastating betrayal that had made this necessary. The task of maintaining their children's sense of security while processing their own trauma seemed almost impossible. George, as the oldest, sensed immediately that something significant was wrong. He had noticed the unusual number of serious-looking adults who had been coming and going from the palace all day, and he could see the strain in his parents' faces despite their attempts to appear normal. When William and Kate sat down with the children that evening, George's first question cut straight to the heart of their dilemma. Are we in danger? He asked with the directness that children often possess. Is someone trying to hurt us? Kate struggled to find words that would be truthful without being terrifying. We're not in physical danger, she said carefully, but we've learned that some people we trusted haven't been honest with us. We need to make some changes to keep our family safe. Charlotte, with the emotional sensitivity that had always characterized her personality, immediately picked up on her mother's distress. Mommy, why are you sad? Did someone do something bad? The question nearly broke Kate's composure. How could she explain to her young daughter that yes, someone had done something very bad? They had stolen the most private moments of their family life and turned them into weapons to hurt them. The innocence in Charlotte's eyes made the violation feel even more profound. William took over the conversation, explaining in simple terms that some of their household staff would be leaving and that there would be new security measures in place. He tried to frame these changes as normal precautions rather than responses to a devastating breach of trust. But the children's perceptive questions made it clear that they understood something serious had happened. Louis, being the youngest, was primarily concerned with whether his favorite staff members would still be there to play with him. When he learned that some of them would be leaving, his disappointment was heartbreaking to witness. These were people who had been part of his daily life since birth, and their sudden absence would leave a void that would be difficult to explain or replace. After the children were settled for the night, William and Kate returned to their private quarters to continue processing the day's revelations. The quiet of the evening, which had always been their sanctuary, now felt different. They found themselves speaking in whispers, even though they had been assured that the surveillance equipment had all been removed and that their private spaces had been secured. "I keep wondering what else they know," Kate said as they prepared for bed. "What other private moments did they steal from us? What intimate details about our marriage, about our struggles as parents, about our fears for the future? What else is out there being analyzed and potentially used against us?" The uncertainty was almost as devastating as the known violations. The investigation had revealed the scope of the surveillance that had been discovered, but there was no way to know if other systems or methods had been employed that remained undetected. The possibility that there were still unknown breaches of their privacy made every private moment feel potentially exposed. William found himself reviewing their entire relationship, trying to identify moments when Kate's instincts about being watched or listened to had been dismissed or ignored. He realized that her natural emotional intelligence had been detecting the surveillance long before their security team had uncovered it. But her concerns had been attributed to the stress of royal life, rather than taken seriously as potential evidence of actual threats. "I should have listened to you," he said, for what felt like the 100th time that day. "Every time you said something felt off, every time you mentioned feeling uncomfortable about someone or something, I should have paid attention." Kate's response revealed how deeply the betrayal had affected her sense of self-trust. "But what if I was wrong about some things? What if my paranoia made me suspicious of innocent people? How do I know when my instincts are valid and when they're just anxiety?" The psychological impact of the surveillance went beyond the immediate violation of privacy. It had fundamentally altered Kate's relationship with her own intuition and judgment. The people who had orchestrated the surveillance had not only stolen her private moments, but had also undermined her confidence in her ability to assess threats and trust her own perceptions. As they lay in bed that night, both William and Kate struggled with the knowledge that their most intimate moments as a couple had been recorded and analyzed. Their private conversations about their hopes and fears, their quiet moments of affection, their vulnerable discussions about parenting, challenges, all of it had been documented by people who had no right to witness such personal aspects of their relationship. The violation had created a new kind of self-consciousness that threatened to poison even their most private interactions. Kate found herself wondering if the way she expressed affection, the concerns she shared, or the vulnerabilities she revealed might somehow be used against her in the future. The freedom to be completely authentic with her husband, which had always been the foundation of their relationship, had been compromised by the knowledge that such authenticity had been weaponized against her. William struggled with his own feelings of failure as both a husband and a future king. His primary responsibilities were to protect his family and to serve as a trustworthy representative of the crown, and the surveillance breach represented a catastrophic failure in both areas. The knowledge that foreign intelligence agencies had detailed psychological profiles of his family created national security implications that extended far beyond their personal trauma. The couple spent hours that night discussing how they would rebuild their sense of safety and intimacy. They knew that the easy trust they had previously enjoyed would need to be consciously reconstructed through new practices and boundaries. The spontaneous, unguarded moments that had characterized their private life would need to be carefully cultivated in spaces and situations that they could be certain were truly secure. As they finally tried to sleep, both William and Kate were acutely aware that this was the first night in years when they could be certain that their most private conversations were not being recorded or monitored. The relief of that certainty was mixed, with grief for all the intimate moments that had been stolen from them without their knowledge. The morning would bring new challenges as they began the process of rebuilding their household, implementing new security measures and helping their children adjust to a fundamentally changed environment. But that night, they held each other close and tried to reclaim some sense of the privacy and intimacy that had been so systematically violated. The betrayal had changed them in ways that would take years to fully understand, but their commitment to protecting their family and preserving their relationship remained stronger than the forces that had tried to tear them apart. In the weeks that followed the devastating revelation, William and Kate began the slow and painful process of rebuilding their life together. The initial shock and grief gave way to a determined effort to reclaim their family's privacy and security. But the psychological scars from such a comprehensive betrayal would take much longer to heal. The practical changes were implemented swiftly and thoroughly. Every staff member underwent extensive rescreening, with many longtime employees being reassigned or released from service. New security protocols were established that limited access to private family areas and required regular sweeps for surveillance equipment. The children's daily routines were modified to ensure that their private conversations and activities could not be monitored or recorded. Kate found the process of rebuilding trust to be more challenging than she had anticipated. Every new staff member who was brought into their household had to prove themselves not just professionally, but emotionally. She struggled with second-guessing her instincts about people, wondering if her natural warmth and tendency to trust others had made their family vulnerable to such exploitation. The children adapted to the changes with the resilience that young people often possess, but their questions revealed how much they had absorbed from the atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. George, in particular, began asking pointed questions about why certain people were no longer part of their daily lives and why new security measures were necessary. "Did someone we trusted do something bad to our family?" he asked his parents during one of their evening conversations. The mature way he phrased the question made it clear that he understood more about the situation than William and Kate had realized. They decided to be more honest with him about what had happened, explaining in age-appropriate terms that some people had violated their family's privacy and that the changes were necessary to prevent it from happening again. George's response surprised them with its thoughtfulness and maturity. "So we can't trust people just because they seem nice or because they work for us," he said, processing the information carefully. "We have to make sure they really care about protecting our family, not just pretending to care while they're actually doing bad things." His understanding of the situation helped William and Kate realize that their children were more perceptive than they had given them credit for, and that honest communication about the changes would actually help the family heal together. Charlotte's response was more emotional, as expected from her sensitive nature. She became more clingy with her parents and began asking for extra reassurance about their safety and the permanence of their family structure. "Are you and Daddy going to be okay?" she asked Kate one evening, revealing that she had picked up on the strain the situation had placed on their marriage. Kate's heart broke at her daughter's concern, but it also reinforced her determination to rebuild their sense of security and stability. "Yes, sweetheart," she assured Charlotte. "Daddy and I are going to be just fine. We're working together to make sure our family is safe and happy." The process of healing was not linear or simple. Some days Kate felt strong and confident about their ability to move forward. Other days she would be overwhelmed by anger at the people who had betrayed them, or by grief for the innocence and privacy that could never be recovered. William experienced his own waves of emotion, ranging from determination to protect his family to frustration at the violation of trust that had occurred under his watch. One of the most difficult aspects of recovery was learning to be spontaneous and authentic again in their private moments. Both William and Kate found themselves self-censoring even in their most secure spaces, worried that somehow their conversations might still be monitored or that their private emotions might be observed and analyzed. They began working with a counselor who specialized in helping individuals and families recover from privacy violations and surveillance trauma. The sessions helped them understand that their hypervigilance and difficulty trusting their own instincts were normal responses to such a comprehensive betrayal. Your sense of safety was systematically undermined over a period of years, the counselor explained during one of their sessions. Rebuilding that sense of security will take time, patience, and conscious effort. You're not just healing from a single incident, but from years of ongoing violation that you weren't even aware was happening. The international implications of the security breach continued to unfold over the following months. The investigation revealed connections to foreign intelligence operations that went deeper than initially suspected. Some of the private information about the royal family had been used to develop detailed psychological profiles that could potentially influence diplomatic negotiations and international relationships. William found himself dealing not only with the personal trauma of the privacy violation, but also with the professional implications of having sensitive information about the future monarch and his family in the hands of potentially hostile foreign governments. The security briefings he received painted a picture of ongoing vulnerability that would require years of careful intelligence work to fully address. Despite these challenges, there were signs of healing and growth within the family. The crisis had brought William and Kate closer together in many ways, forcing them to communicate more openly about their fears, vulnerabilities, and needs. They developed new rituals and practices that helped them feel secure and connected. Even in the aftermath of such a profound betrayal, Kate began keeping a private journal, something she had never done before, as a way of processing her emotions and rebuilding her sense of inner privacy. "I need to know that there are thoughts and feelings that belong only to me," she explained to William. "Even if someone could theoretically read this journal, the act of writing privately helps me remember what it feels like to have internal space that's mine alone." The children, too, showed remarkable resilience. They adapted to the new security measures and staff changes while maintaining their natural curiosity and joy. Their ability to move forward helped their parents recognize that, while the family had been deeply wounded, they had not been permanently damaged. As months passed, the acute crisis phase gradually gave way to a new normal. The comprehensive security measures became routine, and the family learned to navigate their changed circumstances with growing confidence. Kate began taking on more public engagements again, though she approached them with a heightened awareness of privacy and security concerns. The experience had fundamentally changed how they understood their roles as public figures and private individuals. They developed a more sophisticated understanding of the ways their private lives intersected with their public responsibilities, and they became more intentional about protecting the boundaries between their personal and professional identities. William often reflected on how the crisis had tested not just their security systems, but their commitment to each other and their family values. "We learned that our real strength isn't in being able to prevent bad things from happening," he told Kate during one of their evening walks in their newly secured garden. "It's in being able to face those bad things together and come out stronger on the other side." The door that William had opened that morning months ago had led to one of the most difficult periods of their lives, but it had also revealed the depth of their love for each other and their determination to protect their family. The tears that Kate had shed were not just tears of grief and betrayal, but also tears of recognition that they had the strength to overcome even the most profound violations of trust. Their story became one not just of victimization, but of resilience, recovery, and the power of authentic love to heal even the deepest wounds. The privacy they rebuilt would be different from the innocent trust they had lost, but it would also be stronger, more intentional, and more precious for having been consciously chosen rather than simply assumed.